I don't know that the call to action, that I've not had a good, consistent call to action. Like I've not had a core message for podcast appearance. I don't know that I've done that.
Like I said, the most common answer, I mean, that's definitely something we help people with. But the good news is the signal here is, even without necessarily like a super well thought out story arc and like and design of the interview, and even without a clear call to action, you've gotten clients from sounds like most of the recent appearances. That's awesome. So that speaks to the fact that long form educational content is your jam. It actually like is the magnet that gets the right people to listen to you. And I think you could double your effectiveness, your conversion rate, with just adding a really clear call to action, making sure there's like a keystone story that really hits them emotionally about why this is a pain they actually have and agitating. It's like doing the thing you have to do on sales calls and making a podcast interview both educational and helpful, but persuasive, and like using a steady, consistent framework and a consistent call to action. Then you've already written a book, you're writing another one. You have more than enough things to choose from for what that call to action would be. And obviously you said you have a newsletter. So you have like all the foundational pieces to build upon the system that you opened with earlier. Like, man, if I had either a person or like a marketing system that just constantly generated the leads, like, and now we've got better offers to send those people through to make this a more scalable fulfillment. I mean, I really think, I think if you did one podcast a week and it was and your role was simply to show up and do the interview, and the system or the virtual assistant was making all the things happen to get you on the show and making all the things happen to get them into your sales process and get them on a call with you, since you're really good at that part, that would probably be the lead you need. It was just being on the right shows with the right story and the right call to action on a consistent basis with very repeatable systems, either through technology or a virtual assistant running all the stuff outside. So you don't have to think about that part. You just show up and do your thing, and then you take sales calls, and then you make money. So I think you got that. And so I think podcast guesting, it's probably obvious, like where to do this. You've started to do it, but sales podcasts, health tech podcasts, podcasts that sales reps would listen to, podcasts that founders would listen to that are in this industry. And if you're like, man, it's like, a lot of times you're so niche. A lot of times people are like, I just don't know if there's enough podcasts. We can find a lot of those podcasts. One of the ways I would help discover those is like, where are your ideal clients being interviewed? Because there's probably a lot of these founders of these health tech systems and these other things, the SaaS companies, they're being interviewed about their company and about the stuff that they do. And we can find them very easily and like, oh, they're being interviewed there. That's where I'm going to go get interviewed next. And so you not only know that it's the right environment, but every time you're interviewed on one of these shows, all these guests who are your potential clients, you now have a warm, open connection to them to get them into your sales process. So personally, I think there's a plethora of podcast guesting opportunities. And if you go a rung out from that, we have things like LinkedIn Lives or other sort of educational based partnerships where you're doing workshops or speaking at conferences. These are all sort of like the same strategy, but just with a slightly different package around it. So I'd like to spend the next like 5 minutes as we wrap up. I think podcast guesting, 100% winner. There's some tweaks that we can make there, and that'll be off to the races. I also like to think through like strategic partnerships. So you mentioned you get word of mouth and referrals. Usually a lot of times those come from clients, but they can also come from centers of influence who serve your ideal client, but in a different way. So what comes to mind? Do you have some of those in place, or is there like places we should double click and start thinking about where you could have partners that would give you opportunities for an influx of customers all in one stop, I guess?
Here's one that immediately comes to mind. And I've got, this works a little bit already, but anybody that does lead generation, right? And then gets customers on the phone, right? For their client. They want those leads to convert. And oftentimes they throw the lead over the fence to the company, and then it doesn't convert. And what lead gen companies should do, and one has, and I probably could get another or two to do this, is say, hey, invest in this guy for a month or 2 months. So it's a variation on the sales call tune-up thing, and that is I would work with them and on their, as they get leads, prep them for the lead, in some cases, hey, here's, and so in the beginning, Can you eliminate some of their bad habits before they start, and then also assess the calls, and then build them up, motivate them, and also teach them more about process, about discovery, about how to qualify, how to determine whether or not there's a fit, those sorts of things.
So the way you described that was definitely something to explore, and that's a little more of an embedded partnership where it's like this lead gen company trusts Brendan, and you're almost like a part of the team. Upstream from that, which would be more scalable and help you find more of those deeper relationships, would be as simple as doing guest training, right? Like, so you could look at the lead generation companies in your space and you go to them and say, hey, you've got a client, you've got a bunch of clients. Let me come in. I'll do a free training on how to do sales calls better. It's just going to make you look better. It's a value add to your people. And then obviously, if I get some clients, I'll give you a referral fee back. And it doesn't take from them. And in a sense, you should also be able to send them referrals, right? Because people come to you for sales problems and you're like, hey, we fixed it. If you need more leads, I really like this other company that I've done some partnerships with. They're really good at lead gen for this particular like hyper niche thing. So I think that lead gen seems like an obvious one where you could do guest training for them.
Can I just clarify? Am I doing guest training for the lead gen company, or am I doing it for their customer?
The way I'm envisioning it would be the lead gen companies like, hey, all of our customers, this month we have Brendan coming in. He's going to do a guest webinar, guest training. So it's a value add to their client base. There's going to be people in that pool that are like, we really need help. This company is giving us the leads, but we do need this help. So their clients are the ones hiring you, and then you give a referral fee back to the lead company for featuring you as an expert on sales conversion. So I think there's that. There's like an infinite probably number that we could, if we sat down and mind map this with like who else serves health tech companies. It's like insurance regulation, finance, I don't know, but like they have a pool of clients who are these founders of health tech companies who have all this stuff that they spend money on, and you're just like a featured resource, right? And then when you have this community of the accountability pods, like maybe you return the favor and you're like, hey, why don't you come talk about lead gen in my sales pod, because I don't do lead gen, I just do sales conversion. So that when I think of strategic partnerships, it only takes a couple of those to really be a major source of leads. And one of the best ways to find those opportunities is through podcast guesting, because those people also listen to those same podcasts because they're in the industry. And like I said earlier, if you look at the guest list at some of these shows you've already been on that are industry specific, and you're like, oh, wait, like Jill owns a lead generation company and she seemed like she really knew what she was talking about. I'm going to go reach out to Jill and see if we can do a partnership where I could come do some guest training for her client base. And one way to reciprocate that is through referral fees. Another would be to let her do guest training for your client base if that was appropriate.
Yeah,
I like to think in terms of, if you get into just an easy mind map of this, is like every week I'm on, and you could do more or less, but like every week I'm on a podcast. That's real easy. I show up for 30, 45 minutes. I've got my signature talk that gives me a consistent baseline of leads. It develops a ton of new relationships. There's a lot of great momentum because you're creating that flywheel. And then if you want to pour some gas on the flywheel, like once a month, do some sort of partnership. And maybe that's, like I said, it's what we just described with a lead gen company. It's inviting 3 other experts in your industry to do a guest panel on LinkedIn. It's speaking at an association. It's speaking at a conference. These are sort of the big rocks that you can throw in there, but you've got the consistent baseline of podcast guesting to like run the machine infinitely. So cool. Well, I know we have like 2 minutes left. So I want to pause here, Brendan, and ask you, what do you think is your biggest takeaway from our time together so far?
there's several, but I'm certainly the community idea just has so much potential. Number one, and then now this lead gen joint like collaboration idea, I think has a ton of sense. It just makes. And I mean, one of the things going through my head is I have to get the transcript of this call now, because I'm going to go back and have to take all the notes no, there's several good points, but those are two that come immediately to mind.
Yeah, maybe we'll work together at some point. We can build this flywheel for you, and that'll make it all easy. You don't have to take notes. But I this is really fun because I love to like get into these niches. It's like B2B. People are like, podcast, you can just go on there and sell like low dollar meat sticks or whatever, like my story, right? But I'm like, no, there's applications of the same strategy for all levels of market, right? And I love your openness and transparency. Before we wrap, I'd love for you to share, if people are listening and they're like, I could use some sales help. I need some more Brendan in my life. Like, what's the best way to either get a hold of you or get on your email list or that sort of thing?